The Return of the Indian by Lynne Reid Banks, Chapter 7, Matron. Under the first street lamp, Omri pulled up. His heart was hammering. "Well?" asked Patrick eagerly. "Did you get it? Let's look." Omri had something in his hand, but he knew it wasn't the one he'd wanted. It wasn't the surgeon. He would have been able to feel the square shape of the operating table. It was a single figure. He held his hand closed around it, afraid to look. What if it was only a lawyer, or that idiotic bowler-hatted businessman? Slowly, in an agony of suspense, Omri uncurled his fingers. Both boys slumped with despair. Omri gave a deep groan. Then Patrick rallied. "It could be worse. Nurses have to know something." "They can't operate. They're not trained. It's better than nothing." They walked on. Omri sunk in gloom. Patrick kept trying to cheer him up. "Listen. If he can hang on till tomorrow, we can go out and buy anything we like at the model shop. They'll have the same set. Meanwhile, at least the nurse will be able to tell us how bad he is." "If she doesn't drop dead when we bring her out of the cupboard," said Omri. He was cursing himself for not managing to grab the surgeon. He would also, incidentally, have liked to jump up and down on Tamsin's stomach until she burst like a balloon. He was bruised all over. Patrick, of course, had never seen the district where Omri now lived. As they came out of the station, he paused, glanced down Hovel Road, and said, "Blimey, this is a bit rough." Omri said nothing. They began to hurry towards his house. "What are the kids like around here?" "Well, you have to stand up for yourself." They were passing the amusement arcade on the other side of the street, of course. It was just closing. The proprietor, a surly-looking Sikh, was urging everyone out. There was a good deal of swearing, jeering, and shoving. A scuffle started. A rather small skinhead jostled an older boy, who reached out, hurling him unceremoniously into the road, where he was narrowly missed by a passing car. "Crumbs!" exclaimed Patrick. "Did you see that?" "Yes, and it'll be us next if they spot us," said Omri. "Come on." Omri's mother opened the door to his knock. She was furious. "Where on earth have you been? Don't you ever go out again at night without telling me? I've been frantic." "Oh, hello, Patrick. Fancy seeing you. Are you planning to spend the night?" Patrick looked daunted, but Omri had no time to pacify his mother. After a brief, "Sorry, Mum," he dragged Patrick after him up the stairs, deaf to her inquiries about where he'd been and where Patrick would sleep. As soon as they had the door of his bedroom shut behind them, Omri switched on the main light. He'd left his bedside lamp on so bright stars wouldn't be in the dark. Patrick cautiously approached the chest, his eyes wide, as if his unbelief had come back to him, and the sight of the living miniature people struck him afresh as incredible. Bright Stars had jumped to her feet as they came in. She recognized Patrick at once and raised her hand to greet him. "Hello, Bright Stars," she said softly. "How's Little Bear?" She stepped aside and pointed. Little Bear's eyes were open. They were big with pain. He fastened them on Patrick and then saw Omri. He didn't speak, but a look of joy came over his face. He closed his eyes. "Omri, help now," asked Bright Stars beseechingly. "We're going to try." He wanted to tell her not to be too hopeful, but he couldn't. He brought the figure of the nurse out of his pocket. He and Patrick examined it again. "She's wearing one of those weird high hats," said Patrick. "When I was in hospital, having my tonsils out, nurses with those sort of hats were important. All the others scurried about when they came into the ward." "Maybe she's a matron," said Omri, who, though he hadn't ever been in a hospital, did not watch TV for nothing. "Yes, something like that. Come on, let's do it." No matter what the circumstances, this was always a thrilling moment. Into the cupboard went the little female figure, in its blue uniform dress and white apron and elaborate cap. Would she be old or young, awful or nice? Above all, how would she react when she saw them? In the past, the little people they had brought to life had been superstitious enough or drunk enough to accept the fantastic situation. Even Tommy had been easy to convince that he was dreaming, but a modern person might have much more trouble accepting the facts. A quick turn back and forth of the key, and instantly a severe voice could be heard calling from inside the cupboard. "Nurse! Nurse! Please phone through immediately and tell maintenance there's been a power cut in Ward 12. No need for alarm, ladies, just a little electrical failure. We'll have the emergency generator working in no time." Omri opened the cupboard door. "Ah!" cried the voice. "That's more like it. Now, where was I?" And it stopped. Omri swung the door right back. The matron stood there on the shelf, where they had put her, with her hands coming slowly away from her hips. She looked at the two enormous faces for a few seconds, then she covered her eyes, rubbed them, shook her head briskly, and looked again. Then she said, "What's this then, boys? Some kind of trick? Put the mirrors away and get back in your beds." Then, when nothing happened, her face suddenly went as white as her cap. She did a kind of spin on one heel and fell straight backward off the shelf. Omri just managed to catch her. He'd been half expecting something of this sort. She lay in the palm of his hand in a dead faint. Omri marveled at the feeling of her tiny, warm, limp body, in its crisp, starched clothes, alive. He transported her gently to the chest and showed her to Bright Stars. "White woman dead?" she asked, aghast. No, she's just had a fright. Make her sit up and put her head between her knees." He showed her how. Bright Stars wasted no time. After a minute or two, the matron showed signs of reviving. The first thing she did was reach up to check her cap, which was like a white organdy castle with flying buttresses and banners. It was still in place. Miraculously, it was. She scrambled to her feet and stared around her. She was middle-aged. Omri guessed from her face and voice. She wore glasses and no makeup, and looked formidable. He was glad that he was not a patient in her charge. At the same time, she did look as if she knew her job, if only she was not too terrified to do it. He cleared his throat. "I know it's hard to believe," he began, "but you've come through a magic cupboard, which has made you very small. Please don't be frightened. You can think it's a dream if you like, or some kind of trick, but there's nothing to be afraid of. After you've helped us, you can go back to your normal life. Would you mind telling us your name?" The woman opened and shut her mouth several times like a goldfish. Then she managed to say very faintly, "You can call me Matron." Then she swayed and put her hand on her forehead. "I must be going mad," she muttered, and she looked as if she might fall over again. "Please, you're not mad. Don't faint." Matron stiffened at once and lifted her chin. "Faint? Me? Don't be absurd. I've never fainted in my entire life." She straightened up her splendid cap and stared at them haughtily. "Matrons don't faint. The very idea." Patrick opened his mouth, but Omri nudged him into silence. "I beg your pardon," he said. "Not that I wouldn't be grateful for a strong cup of tea," she remarked severely, "especially if there's any work to be done." "There is!" Omri exclaimed eagerly. "I'll get you some tea later. But could you please look at a patient for us?" Bright Stars was already almost pulling Matron over to where Little Bear was lying on the ground. "Dear me!" muttered the matron. She adjusted her cap and her glasses and knelt down beside Little Bear's prone form. After a brief but efficient examination, she rose, looked over her glasses at Bright Stars, evidently decided she was innocent of any crime, and turned her accusing gaze on the boys. "This man," she announced, "has been shot in the back." "We know. Yes, we know," said Omri. "He needs an immediate operation to remove the bullets." "We know," said Omri, "only they're not bullets, they're musket balls. Have you seen—" "He must be taken at once to the nearest hospital. I recommend my own, St. Thomas's." "Matron," said Patrick. "Yes, young man." "We can't. You see, St. Thomas's is our size, and he is your size. They wouldn't be able to help him. Everything would be too big for him, don't you see?" Matron closed her eyes for a moment, swayed visibly. Omri stretched out a hand to catch her, and then righted herself with an effort. "This is exceedingly peculiar," she said, "to say the very least. I don't profess to understand what has happened to me, but still, press on. What do you suggest?" "Could he hold out until tomorrow?" She pursed her lips and shook her head. "Most unwise." Omri's heart sank. Couldn't you do it?" The matron started violently. "I perform the task of a surgeon? Such a thing would be unthinkable. The etiquette of the medical profession absolutely forbids it." "But if it didn't—" "What do you mean?" "I mean, could you do it if you were allowed to?" "Allowed to? It isn't a matter of permission." "Well then, you see," Omri said, and now the same imploring note crept into his voice, as had been in Bright Star's eyes. "There's no one else." Matron turned and stared down at Little Bear for a long moment. "But I have no equipment," she said at last. Patrick threw back his head with a groan. "That's true, of course. No one can operate without instruments. Why didn't we think of that?" "I did think of it," said Omri. "We got instruments, sort of." Patrick turned to gape at him. "Where?" For answer, Omri reached again for the plastic figure, which had once been Tommy. Silently, he put him back into the cupboard and turned the key. When he opened the door, there once again was the neat pile of clothes, the boots, and the bag with the red cross on it. And that's the end of Chapter 7.